Okay, Sean, good to see you, and it's a pleasure to have you in the program today. I'm going to begin with when you left Iran. You had two very significant interviews, one with Bill O'Reilly on Fox News, and following that with a CNN correspondent concerning your trip and your views about Iran, which was like a pressure cooker. So I'd like to begin with that, and then we'll continue with your activities now.
Right. Well, in truth, I accepted the role of being a spokesman. I suppose I embraced the idea that I could use the platform I was given at that moment in time to make present a path towards peace, in a sense, to say that there is no need for the warmongering, because it was very strong at the time. This was 2012, and I remember the excitement. That was the beginning of Obama's second term, and I think there was a desire by certain people to go to war with Iran, as there had been basically 4 or 5 years earlier at the end of Bush's second term. And so in that context, I felt, given that there's this push for war with Iran on the nuclear question, I can make a point and a statement on Fox and on CNN because of the attention around me at the time. So it was not, I was not there basically to say everything that Iran is doing is right, or everything America's position is all wrong, but simply to say we don't have to go to war with these people. As we know, the Iranians can talk, and let's negotiate. And I think in a certain sense I was vindicated, because I said Ahmadinejad is not going to blow up Israel, and sure enough, he did not blow up Israel before he left. And second of all, we now see this peace process that has been ongoing the last couple of years through John Kerry and the end of the Obama administration. There have been these overtures to find basically broker a peace with Iran, right, between the U.S. and Iran, to reincorporate Iran into the world community. That has been an ongoing process. It's not finished, but I do think that in a sense I laid the groundwork for it by saying the Persians are an ancient people. They want to be respected, and they want to be talked to and dealt with as a country that's not, that doesn't have to be isolated and feared anymore, but has to be treated as part of the world community. And so I think, in a certain sense, I helped lay the groundwork of what we see now in the last few years.
Mr. Stone, we have no beef that you converted to Islam. We applaud all religious people of conscience. But your association with Iran is interesting. Since that country is an enemy to America and many other countries in the world, just heard a discussion with Colonel Peters about the Israelis maybe getting ready to attack Iran. What say you?
Well, in the first place, I wouldn't say, the conversion is an interesting word, because I don't believe you can convert from one God, from one God to the same God. So I've always believed in the same Judeo-Christian God, and I think it's a misunderstanding of Islam to say that it's Allah is a different God. It's just a different name for the same one. So I accepted Islam, and I think it's an important move. Also politically, if you want to understand the history of this region, because the Persians have been Muslim for going on 1,400 years. They have many Jews in Iran, and actually I spoke with some when I was in Isfahan, which is where I took the vow. And the Iranian people are very intelligent people. I had great discussions with politicians. I met with the president briefly. I had discussions with the advisor to the supreme leader. And they have a problem with our government, and it has to do with imperialism as a long-standing policy in this region, going back to the British Empire. But they understood my point of view, and I think it really helped for the American image, frankly, by my being there and having these conversations and having this dialogue.
My second question pertains to what you're doing right now, your activity in the media right now. You have a program called Watching the Hawks with RT, Russia Today. And I find it interesting, quite a few American intellectuals are working with RT. Even some famous media people are working with RT, like Larry King. After CNN, what's it about RT, or what can't you find in America to express that you have to go to RT to express yourself and what's going on around you?
Right. I think that internationally RT is is becoming more and more respected as a channel. I think that in the U.S. it's great to see RT in movies and documentaries. I watch documentaries and I see RT, logo in the corner, and I see anchors and other, it's people like Tom Hartman and Larry King and others who are on, who are on RT. I see them in documentaries and films and RT broadcasts. So I know that RT is making an impact in the consciousness. It's been relegated by the mainstream media. Of course, the mainstream media wants to treat RT like a propaganda engine. I don't see how that's any different than what BBC is, for example, as far as being a state-sponsored company, right? The British Broadcasting is a state-based media outlet. Many countries, if not most countries, have state financing for their news organizations, so it's not uncommon outside of the United States to have it. And even at one point we had PBS, which was public broadcasting that had basically more of a government financing behind it. So that doesn't make it propaganda. I felt that RT had great people who were young, who had more of an anti-establishment perspective in their ranks, not only working in the editorial side and behind the scenes, but also in front of the camera. And so to me, it's like a great venue for these young anti-establishment voices, people who can think for themselves and frankly just challenge the mainstream narrative, because that was always the mission of RT. Question more, right? The idea that, well, the mainstream media between CNN and Fox are ultimately just like the Democratic and Republican Party, and we need more parties in the United States. We need third parties, we need independents, we need people who don't have any party affiliation but just want to speak their minds. And I think that's the spirit of America, and if it has to be Russian television that's going to remind people of these alternative voices, then so be it. I'll go wherever companies and like-minded people are going to work with me to say, yes, we can challenge the authority of this two-party establishment system.
You're attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Go ahead.
No, Mr. President-elect.
Go ahead.
President-elect,
Go ahead.
Since you are attacking
No,
our news
not you.
organization,
Not
can
you.
you give us a chance?
Your organization's
you are
terrible.
attacking our news organization.
Your
Can you
organization's
give us a
terrible.
chance
Let's
to
go.
ask a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Sir,
Quiet.
can you state,
Quiet.
Mr. President-elect.
Go ahead.
Can you
She's
state
asking a
categorically-
question. Don't be
Mr.
rude.
President-elect, can you give us a question?
Don't be
You're
rude.
attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you
No, I'm
give
not
us a
going to give you a
question?
question. I'm not going to give you a
Can you
question.
can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you state categorically that nobody... No, Mr. President-elect, that's not
Go ahead.
appropriate.
Okay, Sean, a while ago we watched Trump in one of his famous news conferences in which he sort of took on CNN, the correspondent, and it was pretty abrasive, the way he approached the CNN, and also what's going on about his fake news, and what he's talking about, CNN not saying a kind word about him the past 2 years. What do you think about that news conference in particular? And now here, Iran has been demonized effectively for the past 3 decades by the U.S. mainstream media. My question is, when you're watching the president, at that time the president-elect, calling CNN fake news, what do you think about this new comer and this new completely, it's quite a scene. It's quite a scene.
Well, if Donald Trump does nothing else as president, you got to say God bless him for calling CNN fake news. I've waited my whole life for a president to call CNN fake news. Good for him. He's right. There is the CNN and Fox and all the mainstream media does propagate fake news. Every news organization at some point gets information wrong. You can argue obviously as what it means to be fake, but at the end of the day, I think that their agenda, I would call it fake news, because they have such an agenda, they have such an axe that they're looking to go against Russia, for example. I mean, look at this document that they're putting together, the intelligence services, the CIA and Homeland Security and FBI and all these guys are coming together saying, well, here's a document that proves the Russians hacked the elections. Well, what does that even mean? That means that there may have been Russian involvement in leaking DNC emails. Okay, that's what WikiLeaks has been doing for years. That's called disclosure. That's the way we're supposed to democracy. Shouldn't we have access and information to understanding how these parties, that are monolithic, how they function? So did the Russians actually hack the election proper? No. I've seen no evidence. No one's saying that the Russians actually changed the votes or hacked the voting machines and made Donald Trump the president. They're saying they may have been involved in leaking documents that hurt the DNC. Well, that's the DNC's problem. That's the DNC's fault if they have documents and emails that make them look bad. That's not Russia's fault. That's not Donald Trump's fault. That's the DNC's fault. I think that no one points out that Hillary was much more tarnished by her relationship with the Benghazi scandal than I think with these DNC leaks. So here the report comes to Donald Trump and CNN says, you have to believe the CIA. If we can't trust the CIA, who can we trust? If we can't trust the CIA, do you understand what country we live in? What does the CIA do for a living? They lie, they cheat, they steal, they murder, they corrupt regimes, they overthrow regimes they don't like. They work for a neoliberal empire and a neoconservative agenda quite often. Not all CIA agents are bad, but I'm saying as an establishment, as an institution, the CIA does not have a repeatable history. So for these CNN guys and to say, well, if you don't trust the CIA, who can you trust? Have you lost your mind? No, that's the point. The American people don't trust the CIA. We don't trust the establishment. We don't trust these lifelong bureaucrats and politicians who are promoting, for the most part, what is a New World Order, basically a one world government. So God bless Trump for calling CNN fake news and standing up. Hopefully he continues to stand up with these guys who are trying to put pressure on him to go against Russia. And I think it has a lot to do with Syria, where we see a lot of fake news in America. In our view of Syria, the American people are only told that the Russians and Assad are killing everybody in that country. They have no idea that the CIA and the various intelligence services have been working to finance and facilitate these jihadists, the Al-Qaeda linked groups, and all these radicals from over 20 countries, from all over the Muslim world, to go and fight jihad against the Syrian government, to destroy the country. That's what's actually, fomenting the civil war. Sure, there's political unrest, but political unrest does not necessarily lead to this level of destruction as we've seen in Syria. That's really the backing of the people like Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State to move arms from the Libya conflict to the Syrian rebels, and then calling these jihadists, these Al-Qaeda operatives, these fanatic Sunni Salafists, to call them freedom fighters is an insult. But it's an insult to the intelligence of the American people who are left uninformed by their news agencies. So that's fake news. We're seeing it on a daily basis.
Okay, Sean, when did this word fake news get coined? When did this get started? I mean, we heard this thing, fake news. When was it coined first?
I don't know when it was coined. It seems to have started circulating in December around the Pizzagate stuff, when certain emails came out from WikiLeaks alleging, basically people alleged that there was a relationship between John Podesta and his brother with this character, James Elefantis, who owns the Comet Pizza in D.C. And the allegation was that they were involved in some level of pedophilia, some level of child trafficking. Now, has there been a real investigation that I've seen? Not really. I don't. I would hesitate to speak on and call people pedophiles until I see a real investigation, as we saw with Franklin, for example, the Franklin scandal, the Franklin cover-up by John DeCamp. That was a real investigation that led to Larry King, who was then, as I recall, like chairman of the Republican National Committee, but he was a very high-ranking Republican. That led to ultimately his downfall, not from the pedophilia side, from a banking scandal, but it was all intertwined. So if the same thing happens with Podesta and company, there needs to be a real investigation. So I would say fake news came from that whole issue where people were using the word Pizzagate to slander. And I understand there's a concern about slandering somebody, but you can't call it fake news if there is smoke to it. We have to investigate and be serious on the subject.
Okay, you've recently written a book called The New World Order, A Strategy of Imperialism. And you discuss a new personality that many of us have rarely heard of, called William Yandell Eliot, the thinker behind such politicians as Kissinger, Huntington, and Brzezinski. among his many students. He died in 1979. And your book has received pretty good reviews. What's the point in writing the book? And tell us a little bit about William Yandell Eliot.
Okay, so essentially, my book, New World Order, was actually my thesis when I was studying history at college. And in the process of getting my my history degree, I had to do this thesis, and I figured, okay, what's an interesting angle is intellectual history, the nature of how ideas are handed down. So I had heard of this character, William Yandell Eliot, because he was a political professor emeritus at Harvard. So he was basically, like, this guy was pretty much heading the government, the government department at Harvard for like over 40 years. And he had a tremendous influence on Kissinger in his younger days. Basically his mentor. He also had influenced Brzezinski to a certain extent, very much Samuel Huntington. And many people who passed through Harvard took his class, including people like John F. Kennedy. So I was curious to understand Eliot as a personality, because he was trained by the the Anglo-American establishment, is what was called by Professor Carroll Quigley called it, because Eliot was trained as a Rhodes Scholar. And that means that essentially he had been indoctrinated into the British imperial processes and the nature of how the British Empire had come to recognize the empire was dying by the beginning of the 20th century. And they knew that the idea of empire was not appetizing anymore, so they had to rebrand themselves. So they first rebranded themselves into the Commonwealth, the British Commonwealth, right? So the idea is everyone's now part of the Commonwealth, and they feel more empowered by this notion of having certain sovereignty, but ultimately the Queen sits at the head of the Commonwealth. And then I think the strategy was that if they wanted to reincorporate America into the British Empire, it would take more than the idea of a British Commonwealth and the notion of language. There's a common language, there's certain common principles. They had to have a certain intention to the empire. And this really starts to formulate itself in the post-FDR era, right after World War II, because FDR was very much skeptical of the British Empire. He understood the danger of this empire. He saw it firsthand when he was in Africa, for example. He saw how they treated their people, the African people, and basically kept them in states of slavery and servitude so they could extract the resources. But after FDR dies, the Cold War begins, and that's key, because the Cold War was a British war against the Russians, and it's playing out to the very present day when the British intelligence is handing Trump documents, or handing CIA documents saying the Russians put Trump into power. That's British intelligence behind that. Look at it. Why? Because the British have fought the Russians since basically the 1820s and 30s in the Crimean War. The British have always tried to keep the Russians in check. They wanted to keep them away from the Mediterranean, so they always tried to keep the Turks fighting against the Russians, right, historically, and they wanted to keep the Middle East out of Russian hands. So that had to do with the Afghan policy, the great game that still exists to the present day. Controlling the opium fields there, but controlling the mountains, making sure the Russians cannot access any warm water ports in the south, right, in the Indian Sea or in the Mediterranean and that whole region. So it's always been a British strategy of boxing in the Russians, keeping them, because the Russians have this tremendous landmass across the Eurasian continent. The British have always tried to play this game of let's keep the Russians in check, and let's use the Germans against them if we can, as they did during World War I and World War II. And then, thereafter, let's use the Americans, because the Americans have the power and the nuclear weapons and the military to do so, to check the Russians. So that's the game. That's a major, major aspect of the New World Order game, is to check the Russian power. And it's sad that the Americans bought into it, because the Americans have a lot of similarities to the Russians as far as being a massive land empire, having this tremendous space, all these different languages and peoples, like a melting pot. Russia is very much that. So I would say, productive, strong people. The Russians obviously are a much older heritage than the Americans, but I don't think the Russians really have a desire for a universal empire. The Russians don't care about, making the entire globe Russia. That's always been more of a British objective. I mean, the time that the Americans chose to go to side with the British in the Cold War period, the Brits had a quarter of the planet under their rule. Right? I mean, they had a quarter of the world, and then they said the Russians were the biggest empire, but the British were the biggest empire. They had colonized the planet. So it's very amazing how the British have played this game of constantly feeding the Americans and teaching the Americans that we have these tremendous traditions and principles of democracy and freedom and rule of law, that that these other cultures, like these ancient, like the Russians, like the Persians, like the Chinese, that they don't have that tradition of rule of law and freedom that we do, so we're better than them. And to a degree, of course, I think America's a tremendous country, and I think we have these this wonderful land to operate from, and we don't we do have things that I think are better than a lot of other cultures. But why do we have to go and propagate this empire? That's a British mentality of empire. It's not an American mentality, I don't believe. And a lot of it has to do with economics. It has to do with controlling resources. So the New World Order really is about trying to get a hold of as many countries as possible under the premise of neoliberal economics and military aid, for example, military bases, to ultimately put the world's resources under Anglo-American hegemony as much as possible. And Europe, obviously, Western Europe is a major aspect of that with NATO and whatnot. So that's very much the game. It's controlling the resources of the world and using the benevolent mask of freedom and democracy to do it.
Make America great again. In the rhetoric of campaign cant and mudslinging, there is a kernel of truth seeking to be explored. With the bank bailouts of 2009 and their subsequent consolidation into too big to fail status, we now have fewer banks controlling more depositors' money. Our biggest corporations and banks are larger than whole countries' economies. The income gap between rich and poor is growing, with 1 in 3 Americans working part-time jobs, often living from paycheck to paycheck. But is it any surprise that Main Street has become subservient to Wall Street? Wall Street, after all, thrives on our speculation, short-term profit, and debt. And in this process of financializing America's economy, we have seen our country transformed from the blue-collar workshop of the world into an unrecognizable land where many cities and streets now resemble those of third-world countries. But the issue is bigger than the greed of 1%. As a whole, have we lost sight of the physical economy that provides the essential infrastructure and industry that allows markets to develop and thrive? That is the question at the heart of my new documentary, A Century of War.
Sean, my next question concerns the 4-part documentary that you produced and directed for Russia Today. You interviewed men like Senator Gravel, Professor Engdahl. Let's hear your views on the purpose of producing this documentary, and what is the continuation, and what is the main theme of this work?
So A Century of War is a documentary that I put together. It aired as a 4-part special on RT, but it's really a standalone documentary. And it's a century of war, meaning what? For America, the American century was a century of war. Since 1917, we joined the British in fighting the Germans and basically expanding into this mode of imperialism. Why does America, which is isolated here by 2 oceans, has all this land, all this wealth, all these people, why did we start engaging in this militarism? Why did we start engaging with the British Empire against other empires? What is that America's business? So 100 years now, America has basically set off into this imperialistic venture, I would say. And it's done devastation to the American economy domestically, to our industrial productivity, to our science and technology-driven history, because that's what made America great, was the idea of scientific and technological progress, the idea of rails, for example. Our transcontinental rail system was the first to be built in the world from New York to San Francisco. And the idea was, it was about using trade and productivity to foment the rise of America to this great power. So wonderful. We won the First and Second World War. We had this huge arsenal that was supposed to be an arsenal for democracy. And yet we never shifted after World War II from a military to a peacetime economy, I would argue. The peacetime economy that we see in America is very much now predicated in things, obviously the stock market, it's predicated in real estate, healthcare, the internet and technology sector. But it doesn't necessarily go back to the working man anymore, because we've seen it that Americans are not making the same wages that they were historically about 40 years ago. If you compare the minimum wage, for example, it's lower. If you compare what the middle class looks like. It's a shrinking middle class. So all these reflect the fact that Americans are not doing better individually, but we're being put more and more into a debt, basically a debt economy. So we can acquire more, we can purchase more, we can have more things, but it always is coming at putting us basically into a situation where we probably can't get out of the debt. And it's evidenced very clearly by the student debt situation. Even students are being put into debt situations that they may never get out of in their lifetime. So that's the nature of America and growth. Really, I would say since the 80s and early 90s has been a growth that's put us into deeper debt, and the semblance, the appearance of a growing strong economy, the strongest economy in the world, but really the dollar has been backed by what? By petroleum, by oil. And that's a relationship with Saudi Arabia that has basically, I think, been very detrimental to America because the Saudis are fanatical, obviously, and represent the worst aspect of Islam, and a lot of the terrorism that we see is an outgrowth of them. But we're basically have this partnership and relationship with them because they keep investing their money back into our economy in different forms, and also because everyone in the world has to, every country in the world has to buy dollars to buy oil. So that keeps the American dollar strong, artificially strong, in a way that I don't think it necessarily would be if petroleum was not backing it. So we basically have I would say, a country that has become superficially is still the strongest in the world, but on the level of people in the middle and lower class, I don't think you can argue that anymore. I don't see America having the integrity, the physical economy, and the integrity of that infrastructure to support and grow for most Americans.
Sean, my next question pertains to how is Trump going to play out this upcoming drama? How is he going to play it out with the neocons? How is he going to play it out with Putin? We have signs. We see how he's dealing with the Russians. How is he dealing with the Syrians? How do you think this drama is going to play out?
You know, I think people say Trump is anti-Muslim, for example. I think if he plays the anti-Saudi, anti-Salafist, anti-Wahhabist aspect, I have no problem with that. I have no problem with him being, anti-Wahhabist, for example, or Salafist. I have no problem with him fighting against these jihadists and these fanatics that are basically being recruited as mujahideen to fight in Syria. You know, that's the best thing he could do, for example, on the military front, would be to work with the Russians, who have the same strategic desires that we do. And Putin said this in 2015. He said, let's fight terror together. You know, why are we opposed on this issue? We don't want terrorism, right? Why are we not working together on this issue? Why are we not working together in Syria if you really want to stop ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all these groups? But I think, you know, the neocon, and not just the neocon, a lot of American empire and frankly, British Anglo, because it's a useful weapon to maintain the national security, military, industrial complex, right? It keeps that state going, it fuels it. We have to have wars everywhere, and the wars justify access to oil oftentimes. It's access to resources, resource wars. So they can use these terror groups as a motivation to say, let's go into Africa now, let's go into, you know, Niger and Nigeria and Chad and Mali and next one, who knows, you know, Uganda, wherever it may be next. Let's keep, you know, fueling war, because that's the engine by which the New World Order expands itself, right? And I think the terrorism is a very powerful tool for that. So if Trump can actually work with Putin in a real sense against terrorism to stabilize the nation states of the Middle East, for example, to stabilize the nation states around the world in a sense of, I would, you know, frankly, the best thing I could see him doing would be an FDR type of New Deal, where you basically have a transfer of technology. You have you promote entrepreneurship and business development for the planet, because that's what the planet needs right now as far as dealing with any of these problems that we're facing, whether it's ecology or economics. It is ultimately access to new and better technologies that can actually improve people's standard of living and their basically their relationship to each other. And it's going to take a lot of different efforts. I would really urge people to watch Century of War to get some ideas on the energy front, but on the economic front, You know, it's simple things. It's like building rail systems so we have infrastructure again, and not just in America, but across the world. Rail systems so we can commute and trade with each other, and basically produce in a sense that is smarter, more ecologically friendly, but also just more. It ultimately will play together. Ecology and economy work together when we're working with the best technologies that are available to us and working in a smarter fashion. So that's what I could see for the planet, is just an era of growth, but in the sense of raising standard of living for people, not just looking to make profit and quick returns, but long-term investments in each other, in the growing economies, even in America. Every country needs it. Long-term investments so that we can build basic infrastructure for communication, for markets, for people to trade with each other, to embrace each other and learn each other's customs and languages. Frankly, I think already I'm having hope, because how can you have war with countries? How can you have war with the Afghans or the Persians if you have Facebook, if you have social media? Already this is bringing us closer together, right? So we're seeing each other as human beings. So I think we're in a very interesting place and time, and the main thing stopping that is the desire to keep people separated by artificial constructs, using religion, using economics, using politics to divide each other. When we recognize more and more, we're all human, we have the same wants and needs, as Kennedy said back in '63, and we all live on the same planet. Let's recognize that, and let's start to recognize a commonality and start to work together to build a better future for us and for our children and grandchildren.
Sean, my next question pertains to the film Snowden, which is made by Mr. Oliver Stone, your father, which is quite a feat. It's a very smooth, beautiful film. What was the reaction, and what are your takes on it? What about the reactions within America? How popular was it?
Sure. I mean, I don't want to speak too much on Snowden because it's my dad's film. I didn't have any involvement in making it. All I can say is that I think it was a very challenging process for my father to go through, because none of the American studios wanted to do a story like that that would be sympathetic to Snowden and to his perspective and what he actually accomplished. As you can see in the political landscape, the landscape currently in America, they constantly keep putting out reports, congressional reports, saying that Snowden was a traitor, that he was basically, he may have been giving secrets to the Russians, he may have been recruited even before going to work for Booz Allen Hamilton as a Russian or some kind of foreign agent. They make a lot of allegations like this. So the idea is to constantly smear him as a traitor, someone who betrayed America, even though obviously he revealed very important things regarding the overall apparatus of national security surveillance and spying that's been going on domestically, not just abroad, but domestically. And most Americans, as a result, have kind of tuned out Snowden as a character. They don't want to get emotionally involved, I don't think, or too invested in his person. They look at it like it's a very touchy issue and they don't know where to side. So I think that's why there's not been a tremendous reaction to the film as there had been to films like JFK, for example, that my dad made, where I think more Americans felt a tremendous sympathy and love for Kennedy, so they could get behind the idea of the conspiracy, whereas with Snowden, I don't think he was as endearing to the American public, so it hurt the opportunity for the film to be embraced, even though it's an important story that obviously informs the American people. And I think my dad's doing a great job, especially with the Untold History series that preceded it, to try to tell American history in a new perspective, through a new lens that Americans don't get, obviously from the history books and from the CNN and Fox fake news.
Hello, I'm Oliver Stone. When I was a young boy growing up in New York City, I thought I received a good education. I studied history extensively, especially American history. It made sense. We were the center of the world. There was a manifest destiny. We were the good guys. Well, I've traveled the world now. I continued my education as an infantryman in Vietnam. I've made a lot of movies, some of them about history. And I've learned a lot more than I once knew. And when I heard from my children what they were learning at school, I was perturbed to hear that they were not really getting a more honest view of the world than I did. We live much of our lives in a fog, all of us. But I would like my children to have access to something that looks beyond what I would call the tyranny of now. You watch the media, everyone talks about that thing, the news of the day, and all the subconscious, really important stuff that's going on is being neglected. Napoleon once said that history is a pack of lies agreed upon. Well, I'm not sure I agree. I believe history does have a meaning, does have a purpose, and there is a pattern to be found. And I wanted, with my colleagues, rather than make another feature film, to tell the American story in a way that has never been told before. There are many questions that you may not find answered here, but you will find questions raised that I hope will help make you more conscious. We are going to propose, among other things, a forgotten set of heroes. People who suffered for their beliefs and who have been lost to history because they did not conform. And we are going to debunk some of those heroes that you believe in, not with malice, but by restating the facts. Unless we remind ourselves of the good that we have lost, it's not easy to imagine a better future. By showing you the patterns of behavior which have come to be that you perhaps have not noticed before, we will try to bring you back to the meaning of this country and what's so radically changed after World War II. There have been some profound mistakes, but we still have a chance, I strongly believe, to correct them.
My next question is a follow-up on a previous question, and that is the unsung drama, Sean. The role of Trump, the onslaught, the confrontation, the American middle class, and what we're talking, some people look at the end of time scenario. What is it that we have to be aware of at this time, especially with the role of the media that has been now exposed by the US president, especially now where the role of the media is so abruptly and so seriously exposed. So you sitting on the other side, we are on this side, how are we supposed to take things in? And how are we to interpret this drama that is ensuing?
Well, I think, first of all, I hope that he stays safe, because I can imagine it's a situation where they would potentially want to intimidate and even get rid of him if they feel that he was that much of a threat to the system. We've seen it before. So I think he should protect himself first and foremost. I understand. I see it as though it's we're living in a time of hardening our perspectives to really recognize who's who and what's what. What do we stand? What are our beliefs? This is so important. It's not just here. It's across the entire planet. Every country is facing this almost like an end time scenario. What do you stand for? What's important to you? I don't think that we need to get caught at the level of believing in Trump as the savior any more than Putin or Hillary Clinton or Obama. These people are not saviors, but they do, in a sense, represent aspects of the archetypal drama that's playing out across the planet. And so we need to recognize first and foremost who we are. Where do we stand on these issues? Are we going to live in a world that is increasingly conscious, that is increasingly recognizing the lies that are being disseminated to us by the establishment, by a system of power that propagates greed and slavery? I mean, I love that people are so anti-Trump, and yet they've gone back. They've come to love their servitude. They've come to love their slavery, because the American democracy is not much of a democracy. It's a two-party system. It's run for the benefit of massive transnational corporations that have far too much power and influence globally, that oftentimes resort to low wages, if even wages. Sometimes it's even slavery and child slavery around the world. That's the planet that we're living in. So how can we love this system? How can we say Trump is the bad guy? No. The system, the economy, the overall New World Order is a problem. And it's time for us to wake up and recognize it, and hopefully, we can stand up and make a difference.
Sean, thank you so much for participating in this interview. Hope to see you in good health, inshallah, in the future. And we have to hear more about what you think and what you're doing in the future. And there's definitely an audience for you in Iran to hear what's going on. So take good care. And this ends the program with you until another program of our program called Asr. Take care.